Well, 11:33, that's what the time says, and we are indeed live, reaching you from Nigeria's number one for talk. Well, it's a station for the nation. I'm not trying to rhyme, or shall I say no pun intended, but that's a statement of fact. I mean, we are marking our 9th anniversary tomorrow, right? And what happens again tomorrow? Nigeria will be marking its, or her. Let me use her for Nigeria. Her. But truly speaking, if you think about some elements, you might want to say but yeah, let me say her. Her 60th anniversary. So it's not a coincidence, and it's no doubt that we are Nigeria Info. And it's a time of celebration. And what else are we celebrating? We're celebrating the fact that we have survived yet another month in the pandemic. And that's very important to take note of. And today, we would be celebrating not just survival, but also those who have made or are making impact during this COVID-19 period. We call them COVID-19 heroes. And you know, every Wednesday at this time, I would have Wiebe join me with yet another guest. And guess what? If you're guessing, you're right, because Wiebe is on the line already. Hi, Wiebe. How are you?
I'm good, Collins. How are you doing?
Great. I love the suit. You know, I love it. Looks great.
Well, you know, the person we're interviewing today, she's sort of my boss, so I needed to look good. Plus, tomorrow is Nigerian Independence Day, you know, so we need to really, you know, bring out the best today. So
absolutely. So let's get into the talk today. We do have a guest. I want you to bring my listener. Let's bring the listener up to speed, or bring them in and let them know who our hero, our COVID-19 hero, is today.
So today we've gone Pan-African, and we're bringing a guest who is from Zimbabwe but living in South Africa. Her name is Dr. Jacqueline Chimhanzi. She's the CEO of the African Leadership Institute. And the African Leadership Institute runs the Tutu Fellowship, and I'm a Tutu Fellow, so therefore she's my boss. Now, the first, so Jacqueline, ready? Thank you so much for being on with us today. And how are things going down there?
Thank you, Wiebe. Can you hear me properly?
Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Great. Everything's fine in South Africa. Thank you for this opportunity.
Great.
All right, good. So look, let's kick it off. Let me ask you the first question. So in 2012, you were named as one of the Forbes 20 youngest power women in Africa. And since then, you've now built a career that's more and more Pan-African focused. So tell us about your journey, you know, and how you've taken on this Pan-African passion that you now pursue.
It's actually a really good question, Wiebe, because when I look at my career, there's pre-Tutu Fellowship and post-Tutu Fellowship. So I'm also a Tutu Fellow from 2010, and I found the program to be incredibly life-changing and transformative. So what it did for me, it allowed me to see myself differently. It allowed me to exercise my agency, not to point fingers. If I want a better Africa, then I need to be part of that solution. So that's what the program did for me. I just saw myself differently. So when I finished the first workshop, I came back to work. And at the time, if you remember, this is 2010. So this is just before the whole Africa Rising narrative. Deloitte Global had decided that Africa was a priority market. They're going to put more money into it to develop services and offerings for our clients to assist them navigate the African landscape, to invest. So I put my hand up. I said, I want to help run the Deloitte Africa desk. And I'll come back to this issue of raising your hand. I'm sure some of your listeners are young, and there's a whole lesson in raising your hand. So I raised my hand and I ran the Deloitte Africa desk. So what I did, I became the consummate expert on Africa. I wrote everything from the infrastructure deficit to agriculture, to how we can use tech to leapfrog, to financial inclusion of women. Yes, I became the Africa expert, whatever that means, but that's how I became perceived. I spoke at conferences, I moderated session. So that was the beginning of my sort of Pan-African passion, but also then the Forbes recognition came in 2012 as one of the young women who were helping to change the narrative of Africa.
Great.
And I want to just come back to this thing about raising your hand. I think for young people listening, it's so important to raise your hand and create your own opportunities. So if I hadn't raised my hand, I would have just been another consultant. But I raised my hand. I created a whole brand around myself, not deliberately, but I was doing what I enjoyed. And in doing what I enjoyed, the brand was built. Thank you.
Wow, lovely. That sounds really inspiring, I must say. But tell us about your role at the African Leadership Institute, and what does this institute do?
Okay. I'm so sorry. I'm being very talkative. I'm just going to go back to the first question and finish it off. So after Deloitte, I still had questions about Africa, Africa's development, Africa's industrialization. I had so many questions, and I wanted to sleep better at night. So I decided I'm going to go join the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa, which is the largest development finance institute in sub-Saharan Africa. So I worked there as a senior strategist, just trying to understand how to help Africa industrialize. And I got my answers. And of course, it's about policy inconsistency. We need better coherence in policy, and we need to implement better as Africa.
Oh, interesting.
Thank you.
So would you like to tell us about your role at the African Leadership Institute, and what does the Institute do?
Yes, so I am the CEO of the African Leadership Institute, and it helps to have had been a fellow before. So I understand, I'm also part of the network of fellows, and I understand what needs to be done better. I understand how the fellows relate to each other. So that's been a very distinct advantage.
Okay.
So the African Leadership Institute was founded in 2006. That's when we had our first cohort. And what it tries to do is to really raise a new generation of young African leaders who will transform the continent either individually or collectively. By taking them through this very rigorous process of the Tutu Fellowship. It's a very self-introspective process. It's quite a painful process. We've seen grown men crying, but people generally come out better at the other end. You know, they have to face their demons. They have to face their blind spots. They work with a psychologist, you know. So, yeah, they have to answer questions. Why would people want to follow me as a leader? Who am I as a leader? What are my values? What do I believe in? You know, issues of integrity. Where do I draw the line? You know, so we're trying to raise a new moral force, so to call it, of new leaders.
Wow, that's
all right. So the Tutu Fellowship is one of the flagship programs of the Institute. Can you give us a little bit about? I mean, you did mention it, but how does it relate to Bishop Tutu? And then give us some of the milestones of the program, and then I think also to help the listeners understand it, who are some of the Tutu fellows in Nigeria? That are actually household names. Maybe you could name some of them.
Okay. So Archbishop Tutu is the patron of the institute and the program, and obviously the program is named after him. But he's more than just a patron. He's more than just a figurehead. The program is actually designed predicated on his values. So his values of Ubuntu, servant leadership, morality, integrity, speaking truth to power, which requires you to be courageous as a leader. So those are the values that we cherish and that we hope we are instilling within our fellows, to be bold, to speak up. We've had a number of Nigerian fellows that have come through, and I think the ones that you listeners would know are definitely M.I. Abaga, Jude Abaga, who's he's a hip hop star. But you know, M.I. was so fantastic on the program. He didn't bring his celebrity to the program. He brought himself. And what we didn't realize he was doing every night was he'd go back to his room and he'd reflect on the day's learnings, what he learned about leadership, about Africa, about the developmental challenge, about himself. And he started writing what turned out to be one of his great albums, A Study on Self-Worth. So A Study on Self-Worth is actually his reflections of the Tutu program. We've also had Omoni, the Nollywood actress and director, producer. We've had Banky Wellington, who was nominated this year, but the program has been deferred to next year because of the COVID pandemic.
Well, talking about...
You forgot me. What about me? And I'm a fellow.
And of course, and Wiebe is also famous. but also, we don't just take famous people. You know, there are others like Akin Oyebode, another superb guy from the 2019 class.
He's famous.
He is also famous. Yes, and Akin is great. I mean, he's now Commissioner of Finance at Ikiti State, and we are looking to him to do big things. He has started well, and I'm watching him. We've also got Bosun Tijani, the co-founder of the CC Hub. We've got Benga Seshan of Paradigm Initiative. Now, Benga's story is a very interesting one. One of the things the fellows have to do is a community project. Remember, we are molded on Archbishop Tutu, who believes in servant leadership. Mm-hmm. So these people have to learn to give back. So Benga's Paradigm Initiative, which is now a massive non-profit organization across Africa championing digital rights and digital skills, was his Tutu project.
Wow.
So he got on the plane after the program. He had very tough conversations with himself. Do I go for comfort or impact? He chose impact, and his Tutu project is now his life's work. Isn't that amazing?
Very, very amazing.
Funded by Google and the Rockefeller Foundation. Yeah.
Wonderful. I mean, lovely. I can relate with most of the names you've mentioned because they indeed have featured on this number of the programs here. But let's get back. You mentioned COVID-19. I mean, these days, can we talk about anything without mentioning that name? Well, the Institute set up a COVID-19 board subcommittee, right, on a high level. What is the mandate of this committee? Because you are our COVID-19 heroes. Let's take that question.
So the mandate of the committee was really to monitor the pandemic and to make recommendations to the board on the impacts, especially with regards to programming. So they came up with various options. You know, this thing was evolving by the day, right? So so we came up with different options, and what we have now decided is to completely postpone 2022 program and to defer to 2021. So we had selected the class of 2020 in March, and that's just about the time when the impact started to be really felt in earnest, and the shutdowns around the world started. So the class will be deferred to next year.
Okay.
So Dr. Chimhanzi, in the end, you know, it was the way that the Tutu fellows sort of individually and collectively responded. That was what was very impressive. So, what were some of the different stories of impact that these rising young African leaders led around the continent? Several of them have been on the show. Mezu has been on the show. Ada, Sarah, Banky W, all of them have been on here. But give us a taste of across Africa. What were some of the things that were being done by fellows?
So we saw many different initiatives, and maybe the best way to talk about them is to cluster them into categories. So one category is just food banks, people setting up food banks and distributing food. You know, we saw that with Monica Musonda in Zambia. Her company produces noodles, easy noodles, and and fortified porridge. She literally went out distributing to vulnerable people in her community. Banky, we've seen him also distributing food in Nigeria. Selo Hatang, he's the CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation in South Africa, and Catherine Constantinides, she's a climate activist. They're also distributing food. Cynthia Omoru, known as Pretty Miss Farmer in Nigeria, also did a massive food distribution drive. Then we've got another category of fellows who did more sort of data aggregation. So there was a need for information at this time. People just needed to understand what is happening on the ground. You've had Debola Williams. He's put together a whole website that aggregates data of who's doing what in Nigeria. Tomiwa also did the same. Then we also had logistics coordination, so we've got a number of fellows who work for Dalberg, the consulting, but on a pro bono basis, they coordinated all the logistics that came into Africa from, let's say, the Jack Ma Foundation. So the logistics of distributing across the continent, working with the African Union and working with Africa CDC. Then the fellows, being the intellects they had to be some thought pieces naturally, so we saw also a lot of writings, some people writing about how they felt Africa could look like post-COVID-19. They started to reimagine a new Africa. And also those in the policy space did a lot of work in terms of analyzing the impact on policy and the economic and financial implications on the continent. Yeah.
Well, if you're just joining us, you are listening to this morning's episode of COVID-19 Heroes. And we do have a hero with us, giving us an inspiring response, or should I say inspiring responses to all the questions myself and Wiebe have been asking. Her name is Dr. Jacqueline Chimhanzi, CEO of African Leadership Institute. And my next question to you, ma'am, has to do with absolutely. Were you surprised by how the fellows responded? Well, I think that's what Wiebe asked you just a while ago. But how did the implications of the pandemic really affect activities of the institute? I know you talked about a postponement of some activities. You want to talk more about that?
Okay, so it also had obviously financial implications, right? So you're about to go ahead with your program. You've got your sponsors in place, and some sponsors will pull out. But it also just means that we've got now 2 years of overheads to cover, but only one class. So there are huge sort of financial ramifications. But I think the world over, every organization has been impacted financially in one way or another. So we will find a way to deal with that. In terms of the fellows' responses, was I surprised? I wasn't really. It's kind of difficult, but I wasn't surprised because of the nature of people that they are. So remember, they are servant leaders. So it wasn't surprising, but it was still surprising, if that makes sense, that during such a time, people would find the time, whilst trying to keep their own businesses afloat, would find the time to reach out and help others. So it was very nice to just see the fellows rise to the challenge and meet the moment and be the leaders that they are, because it's also just in moments of crisis that your leadership is tested. So for me, I almost feel like a proud mother,
Wow.
a proud mother with 400 children.
Do you know what this is? Do you know what this is?
Do you know
what this
lovely
is?
to see my children rise to the challenge. Yes.
All right, great. So I was asking you if you know what this is. Maybe Wiebe would tell you. Do you know what this is?
So it's what they use at Nigeria Info, especially Collins, like when there's something to celebrate. So that
Okay,
yeah.
so it's like.
So we're celebrating your 400 children.
Okay.
We're celebrating your 400 children.
All your 400 children. That's
So Jackie, you have a view across Africa, through the fellows, but also just in your own sort of day-to-day work and so on. What did you see across Africa in terms of broader responses, and which countries seem to have the stronger and more effective response, and what are some things that other countries could learn from those ones?
I think South Africa did really well, living here, but also just reading about South Africa in relation to other countries. I think Cyril really rose to the challenge. I think for a while his presidency.
Collins, did you catch that? How she's on a first name basis with the president of South Africa?
Whoa!
Yeah.
What was I doing? Wow!
Yeah, but his presidency was shaky, and then COVID-19 happened, and then he reinvented himself. So it was just so wonderful to see that in a crisis, people can actually be forced to meet the moment. So I think his leadership has been great. We've just gone into level 1, so we are progressively reducing the restrictions. But it has taken its toll on the economy. It's really taken a massive battering. I mean, the economy shrunk by 51% last quarter. Unemployment has gone up to over about 31%. So the rebuilding is going to be very difficult because there were challenges before COVID. So this has just exacerbated a terrible financial situation, and there's very little fiscal headroom for him to do much. So we've got a long battle ahead.
Now, I cannot but want to ask, post COVID-19, where do you see Africa? In your opinion also, what will the pandemic change about the future of our dear continent?
I'm sorry, I don't have great news for you here. I'd love to be more optimistic, but the pandemic has been terrible for Africa. So all the gains that have been made over the past few years, it's like we've gone back. 2 steps ahead and we take 5 steps back, and that's where we are. And like I said, unemployment is up. There's no fiscal headroom. And I know people like Sarah Maka, who's been on the show as part of a job at the One campaign. They've been trying to lobby the G20 to try and drop the debt. That will help tremendously, but I just don't know whether the G20 will come to the party. But it's a terrible time. And having worked at the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa, I really got insight into what it means to industrialize, but also to create jobs. You know, people talk about creating jobs as if it's easy. It's not. You know, so for example, we used to have our targets as a corporation to create or save 20,000 jobs a year and disburse 15 billion rand a year, which is about $1 billion US, which is a lot. Do you know we'd struggle to disperse? Do you know that we would not be able to create 20,000 jobs a year?
Wow.
Like the whole year, it's difficult to create 20,000 jobs. You know, so this is a DFI giving businesses money to be able to expand and, you know, create jobs, but it's very difficult. And what I'm hoping will happen after this, and this is really where my passion of working with young leaders comes in, is I'm really hoping that governments begin to get the best talent to sit around the table and to co-create solutions. You know, we've got like 400 amazing young leaders in our network. Why are they not being called upon to say, hey guys, you are the game changers. How do we do things differently? Because we cannot continue on this current trajectory. We're just not going anywhere as a continent. We are not.
That's right.
So sorry to be so bleak, but something fundamental needs to change in terms of our capacity to create solutions. Bring young people with new energy, new ideas, new solutions. We need all hands on deck right now.
We do need all hands on deck. Lagos, we are 5 minutes away to the top of the hour. That means our time is fast spent. We have a very interesting guest. I would describe her as Wiebe's boss, if you like. He said it himself. You know, she is Dr. Jacqueline Chimhanzi, CEO, African Leadership Institute. And she's told us a whole lot of great news. And the last one there, it's about what we need to do, you know, to survive the post-COVID era, especially on the African continent. Wiebe, one more question, and then we'll wrap this conversation. I just hope and wish there'll be a part two. Just saying.
Okay, so Jackie, let me make it this question. So you painted a relatively bleak picture, and then you said, you know, leaders like Tutu Fellows are the ones who can work with governments to find the solutions. So in light of that, is there anything the Institute is doing to champion a continental initiative to prepare Africa for post-COVID-19?
So in August, we launched a report called The Greater Inclusion of Young Africans in Public Service and Governance. Okay. I'm working with the Ford Foundation. It's a Ford Foundation funded initiative. And really, that's become my life's work. You know, so for a continent that is disproportionately young, it makes no sense that there are no young people in governance, or at least not enough, right? So there's a representation problem, firstly. Secondly, it means our current governments are not leveraging the talent around them to help them co-create solutions. So if they bring more young people around and they create solutions, they also look good, right? It's a win-win. So I just don't understand why we're not doing this. And then thirdly, we need more young people to ensure sustainability. We almost need to have a deliberate succession plan, right? So all of these institutions, ECOWAS, SADC, the East African Community, Agenda 2063 of the African Union. Our current leaders will not be here to see Agenda 2063, right?
That's right.
So why do they not just start bringing young people now and training them? So it just seems so obvious, isn't it?
Yes, indeed, it is.
So we're young. So it's a young continent, but old leaders. It makes no sense. But it can be very simple things. It could be creating internships, right? So when young economists graduate from Unilag or wherever, they come into government. They get a 2-year internship. They begin to learn how governance works, right? They begin to know how to draft policies. They begin to get experience. And from that pipeline of young people who've been trained, you then begin to give them jobs as the next wave of public servants, right?
Wow.
And then an internship program doesn't have to cost money.
All right, we have to go. And I was going to ask you, because the young Africans and Nigerians, of course, Africans across the continent like me, who would like to be a part of, be a Tutu Fellow. What's the selection process like in 1 second? Oh, your time is up. Your time is up. Let's go. Just kidding. Go ahead. Quickly.
No, great. So in 1 second, we don't advertise openly. You have to be selected, and
Okay.
then once you're selected, you're invited to apply. We get about 350 applications to select 17. So
Okay.
it's a very tough process.
All
Very
right.
competitive.
Thank you very much. My good friend Chilu Lemba from Zambia taught me a word in Bemba. He said it's Mulichani, which means hello. So what would you teach me in one African language I don't understand? Wiebe would learn too.
I'm Zimbabwean. In Shona, we say tatenda. We thank you. Yes.
Tatenda, Jacqueline.
Yes.
Dr. Jacqueline, Tatenda. And Tatenda or Wiebe, we have to go now.
All right. Thanks, Dr. Chimhanzi, for a great show. And thanks, Collins and Tatenda. Have a great week.
Thank
You
you.
too.
You're a good student. Thank you.
All right, guys, that's a much.